growing up, I always had this vision that there's life in the world, and then there's Torah, and the two things have, their own concepts, their own ideas, their own philosophy, and they don't necessarily mesh all the time. Lahavdil, there's, so to speak, there's reality, and then there's Torah's perspective on reality. As I grew up a little more, I started to learn some more Chassidus. I began to understand, no. There's Torah, and then there's quote-unquote reality's perspective on Torah. And one thing which I've also come to learn about that, understand about that, was if you look at a deeper point, if you look on a deeper level and you really analyze something, and stop just listening and repeating things, actually thinking about what you're saying, you realize that every kernel of truth which you find exists in Torah also. And if anything, it existed in Torah long before secular knowledge came to catch up with it. An example of this, there's a universal notion in psychology, which has been proven and is obvious, that the best lies have a kernel of truth. A complete lie, probably won't hang up. But a lie that's invested in a kernel of truth, invested with a kernel of truth, that lie will certainly stand stronger than an outright lie. Anyway, so there's a machlekes, an argument, in Masechtas Avodah Zarah, in the Talmud, in tractate idolatry, on page 50, Daf Nun. And it speaks about something called a margulis. A margulis was basically very interesting. It was 3 stones arranged in a triangle, which sounds very much to me like a cross these days. But anyway, so it speaks about that there was a king who had this margulis. There was a king who had this these stones of Avodah Zarah, and in came some goyim. They took away these stones, and they used them as pavement for the roads. They must have been pretty big stones, I'm assuming. But anyway, a machlekes ensued about whether or not you're allowed to use these roads, which were made with the rocks of Avodah Zarah, because you're not allowed to have any benefit from Avodah Zarah. Something that's Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to benefit from it. So certain rabbis avoided it, and other rabbis didn't bother. They said it's fine. You're allowed to use these roads. What was their machlekes? What was their argument? One set of rabbis said that the only Avodah Zarah which is going to become Aser, Bahana, totally, after it's been Mevatel, of course, is only Avodah Zarah which was worshipped in a way that was similar to the Beis HaMikdash. Which means, if there was some kind of Avodah which was similar to the Beis HaMikdash, then you would be to the Holy Temple, the temple in Yerushalayim, in Israel, in Jerusalem. Then that Avodah Zarah, those pieces of the Avodah Zarah, those pieces of the idol would remain Aser. However, if it has no correlation at all to what was done in the Beis HaMikdash, you can't find any, connection with how we worshipped it similarly in the Beis HaMikdash, then you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to mind about it, you're allowed to derive benefit after it's been destroyed, after it's been dismantled. The second the second group of rabbis said no, any Avodah Zarah, regardless of whether or not it bears any similarity to the Beis HaMikdash, it would remain, it just becomes Aser. It's Aser, it just becomes prohibited, regardless of whether or not it carries any kind of correlation with the service of the Beis HaMikdash. Anyway, so we see here, this is the very argument about whether or not something that's false, which you can't find anything more false than idolatry, does it require a certain kernel of truth for it to be destroyed, for it to be entirely prohibited? Or is it every lie, any lie, has to be avoided, regardless of whether or not it even carries a small kernel of truth? Anyway, that's just my quick thought for the day.